Well, I think I would draw your listeners' attention to an op-ed that David McCormick wrote a few days ago in the Wall Street Journal about the cultural rot that is affecting our military. And I thought it was a very eloquent explanation of a complex phenomenon where we're seeing all these incidents. And we're really seeing, I think, too, reflected in the recruiting crisis, something new and something very troubling. One would hope you join the military because of an allegiance to a higher cause and a desire to serve your country. But incidents like this really undermine that sacred trust. And I don't know if it's purely a generational thing, but it certainly seems like there's something going on here culturally that's very hard to fix. The only thing I think we can do to start fixing it is for senior leaders at the Pentagon in particular to start modeling better behavior in terms of selfless service to country. And anytime we have a general officer who runs their mouth to the press or talks to reporters in an effort to rehabilitate their reputation, or, we have a politicized general and flag officer class, I think that further undermines the trust. And if you're a young E3 or a young first lieutenant looking to your leaders for how to act ethically, you could find yourself unmoored. And so we really have to fix the cultural problem in the military and reinvest in a war-fighting culture, not a politicized, highly civilianized culture. And that's what worries me right now.
Excellent point. Now I want to go to the war game. I want you to tell us as much as you can. I hope it's televised. I doubt that it is. But I would watch that. I would actually pull up the chair and watch the committee do a war game. What is happening?
It is going to be televised. It's not going to be in real time. It's going to be, the whole thing's going to be filmed. And then we're going to, take portions of it, and it'll be televised the next day, I believe, depending how quickly they can cut it up. So I think it'll be a fascinating insight just into the challenge we face across the Taiwan Strait, as well as the different trade-offs that members are thinking about, and what we can do ultimately in this Congress to enhance our deterrent across the Taiwan Strait. One thing that really troubled me yesterday when we had a hearing with representatives from Indo-Pacific Command as well as U.S. Forces Korea, I asked the commander of Indo-Pacific Command if he was concerned about the depth of our magazine capacity, i.e. that we would sort of run out of critical munitions in the event of a war. And every war game I've played, and I've played a few of them now, that happens. And you talk to Admiral Mark Montgomery, you talk to our mutual friend Jerry Hendricks, that's probably the top thing they say. It's just that we don't have the requisite number of long-range anti-ship missiles and, SM-6 and other key weapon systems we need. But the Indo-Pacific commander responded saying he's not too worried about that. He's not too worried about our ability to respond and deter and deal with that contingency. And that shocked me. And every analysis I've seen, including the Center for Strategic International Studies, which just did a comprehensive analysis from 24 war games, suggests that we quickly run out of critical munition systems and that we really need to rearm and fix our defense industrial base. So that's something I'm hoping we can get into in this war game. So again, the intent here is for, in a creative, unique setting, to tease out all of the difficult challenges we face across the Taiwan Strait in order to prevent a war. And that is the ultimate purpose of a war game.
Everybody is a producer. That's our joke in radio. Everybody knows how to do talk radio, and they actually don't. But I am here to give you a suggestion on this war game. Have a narrator open it up with an explanation of a war game, what job you are playing. What job are you going to have, by the way? Are you going to be the president?
All the members are going to be on the blue force, so on the good guy side. We may not have specific roles, but we're all going to be playing on the American side.
Well, my suggestion would be that you and your co-chair from the Democrats act as a joint president or president in SecDef, so that it's a joint thing. But it's got to be explained in a B-roll at the beginning, saying this is how a war game works. Move 1, move 2, and we're condensing it so you can see what happens. Do you know what the first move is?
I don't, and that's by design. Actually, it's the challenge is in the course of 2 hours. Usually these war games, to do them right, take a full day. You have to script a little bit of it, but we genuinely want this to be extemporaneous, and we want to force members to think. And I myself don't know what the first move is going to be. By the way, if if Dwayne or you or somebody really that has just a beautiful voice wants to do some sort of like, James Earl Jones-esque narration to this thing, we could find a way to package that.
No, I don't think so, because that will forever ruin my cred in the debate world. But I do want somebody, doesn't have to be just set it up, because it's so difficult to understand. It's like trying to watch the Green Bay Packers play in a playoff game. I want people to score. I want them to get to the score. And so they got to get the beginning of it. Jerry Hendricks has told me we lose every game in the first 2 matches. I haven't asked Admiral Montgomery has not told me, but we lose them all. And, there's going to be an opening move that's going to put you back. 2034 opens with an attack on a carrier, of course, which I think is a declaration of war.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but I would watch it in real time. And then I would look for people like Hendricks and Montgomery and Stab to publish their commentary. It would be great if America would focus on this and then get a bunch of input. Who is going to be the Secretary of Defense till Lloyd Austin? Michelle, the former Deputy Secretary. Yeah, Flournoy. I would, get them in a room or have them comment on it, because this could really educate the American people. This war is not going to be like August of 1914. It's not even going to be like the phony war of 1940. It's not going to be like the invasion of, it's going to go down in 48 hours, right?
Well, yeah, and 2 quick points. Even in the war games I've played, where you win in the sense that you prevent the Chinese Communist Party from getting thousands of people onto the island, or you sort of degrade the amount of people, the costs are enormous. I mean, you mentioned an aircraft carrier. That's 5,000 Americans dead right there. It's a scale we can't really conceive of. It's a scale unlike anything we've seen since World War II. And getting people to understand those costs is important, because hopefully that creates a sense of urgency around deterrence. We should be moving heaven and earth in order to deter a war, because as we see in Ukraine, deterrence failures are costly and war is hell. And you don't, it's like an ounce of deterrence is worth a pound of war, or whatever the phrase would be. And we just don't, our mindset's not there. We're still operating on a peacetime footing, where paradoxically, the Pentagon needs to be on a wartime footing, particularly when it comes to producing critical weapon systems in order to preserve the peace. That's what it's all about. But I've yet to see that sense of urgency from the top leadership in the Biden administration's Defense Department. This will be at 7 p.m. Tonight, and then my team will let you know as soon as the video is ready. We'll do our best to make sure it's narrated in simple and direct language with no acronyms. I always try and abide now by the Hewitt rule: no jargon, no acronyms. It's very hard for the defense community to do that, but that's what we're trying to do.
Okay, my last suggestion tonight: put out a summary press release of what happened, just the end result. That way, people go, "What?" Because we're going to lose. Every war game that Hendricks has told me about, we lose, and so maybe if your Democratic colleague, who's your ranking member?
Raja Krishnamurthy from Illinois.
I would like to know if you two are playing co-presidents. I know we don't have a co-president, but that is a
but
very.
The headline's going to be. The headline would be Gallagher makes himself president, Hugh. So come on, we don't want that.
Marine in charge of the country. We're in trouble. Okay, Congressman, no breaking off to go watch the Bucks lose game 2. Get it done. I really look forward to talking about it with you next week. Be well. Congressman Michael Gallagher, Rep Gallagher on Twitter. He is here every week, and tonight he's going to be doing the war game with the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party. Thank you, Congressman. When I come back, I'm going to be talking with Olivia Beavers about what Mitch McConnell did. In hour 3, I'm going to play for you the return of Mitch McConnell. We need some Wagnerian dun-da-da-da-da, because when he comes back, he makes sure you know he's back. And he did exactly what the Republicans needed done. He walked onto the Senate floor and he said, are we going to help the Democrats confirm their judicial nominees? No.
Hi, Hugh. I'm good. How are you? I'm really interested in following it. I have not been able to fully catch up with the committee about whether I'll be able to access that. But, I think that Republicans have been doing more and more war games. And I've been really excited to join your show today because I'm still recovering from jet lag after visiting Taiwan with some House members. And wanted to you about what that experience was like a little bit. Because
tell us, just walk us through.
Sure. So it's pretty unheard of, but Chairman McCall decided to invite some reporters to go on this congressional delegation trip over to South Korea and Taiwan. as these members were trying to figure out where the allies were in that region if China does invade Taiwan. So they were meeting with South Korean officials, they were meeting with Japanese officials, they were meeting with Taiwanese officials. And it was really sort of interesting because McCall would sort of go in and say, will you be there if Beijing invades? And some of these countries, he said, will turn around and say, well, what's the U.S. going to do? We're waiting to see what the U.S. will do. And so it was an interesting sort of marker for him in determining where Taiwan was in terms of security. There was a lot of talk about showing support, and McCall was definitely more hawkish than Speaker McCarthy when he was doing the speech with the Taiwanese president. But it was really sort of interesting because Democrats and Republicans who were on the trip both agree how important it is to protect Taiwan. The question is, how much are you going to push the allies in the region to say we're on board as well?
Does anyone have a clear view of what America's response will be if Taiwan is under actual, not cyber attack, not political operations, but super hypersonic missiles falling into Taipei and the Chinese fleet sailing for the island? Do we have any idea what the United States will do clearly and concisely?
No, because they've taken on that strategic ambiguity point of view. Although Biden has multiple times sort of leaned forward and said that they would support militarily Taiwan, and then his aides have walked it back. And I think you're seeing more of a hawkish view. And when I was talking to Chairman McCall, I was asking about this because, your viewers understand why Taiwan is important, but how do you make the rest of the country understand why this island that is a 12-hour time zone, 13-hour time zone away, why is that important to send military troops to if China invades? And he was talking about how if they do invade Taiwan, they will be gaining a huge section of the semiconductor industry. They will not only just become powerful militarily and economically, but they will have a whole other sort of power behind them that will make them this new hegemonic power. We will lose our footing in the broader sort of global power struggle if they do invade Taiwan and we're not able to
Did you talk on the plane or when you were on the ground? It won't be, we're not going to send troops to Taiwan. It's just a question of whether or not our attack submarines sink the troop carriers and whether or not we provide surface-to-air missiles to bring down CCP jets. Did they get into the nitty-gritty? Because the number one question is, will our submarines sink their ships?
No, I know that they were trying to assess. We did a tour of a missile factory in Taiwan. They were trying to assess Taiwan's capabilities in sort of conjunction, I believe, with what the U.S. would be able to provide. But they were also wondering, part of the thing that the U.S. has to do, these members have to do, is sell it to the public. If they can't sell it to the public, the level of resources that they're probably going to be able to send is going to be limited to a certain point. You're seeing it with Ukraine. For a while they were selling it, and then you started having it become entangled in the presidential election. And Ukraine was so much in the background of these discussions where it was coming up with Taiwanese officials saying, because they saw a dictatorial, authoritarian country invading an independent one. And that's how they saw Taiwan. And so they were watching what the U.S. was doing in Ukraine. Will the U.S. keep support? And for them, that was sort of a marker of where we're going to be going forward.
It comes down to one question to me, Olivia, which is the audience of one. What does Xi think we are going to do? And until he knows what we're going to do, he will not be deterred. And so the president has left a trail of tears behind him when it comes to trying to figure out what the hell he means. But at the end of your trip, and are you writing this up or have you written this up and I missed it?
The reason you haven't, by the way, it's outside the Beltway, by about a mile or two.
Okay.
The reason you haven't read today's Morning Jolt is because I haven't finished reading it. I'm just putting the finishing touches on it. It is not about the Cavaliers, which I thought disbanded when LeBron left. I didn't know they were still in.
We are back and we are good.
Okay. No, it's all about the Fox News Dominion settlement, and I take 3 lessons from it. I don't know if it's what you want to dive into, but I've got thoughts if you want to hear.
Well, give me your lessons, and I want to go to the war game tonight that the Select Committee on China is playing. But give me Garrity's hot takes on the settlement because I already gave the audience mine.
All right, first of all, the war game sounds awesome, and I can't wait to get into that. But first of all, covering Donald Trump now is potentially litigious. Because at any given moment, Trump can start talking about the machines were hacked, Vote-matic and Smartmatic and all that stuff. And at any given moment, he can say things. So now if you're a news network and Trump says this stuff, if not immediately afterwards, then in the following program or the following day, there is going to be people jumping on camera to say, there is no evidence of this. Fox News did not present any evidence. Truth is an absolute defense in a defamation case. Fox News did not make this argument at all. Rupert Murdoch said that he believed the election was free and fair and that Joe Biden won the election fair and square. So I think that will make covering Trump a challenge if Trump continues to repeat these sorts of things, and I think there's every reason to expect that he will. Second big one, and I think why I feel bad for the people at Fox News who I like, is that your good work does not balance out the bad work. There were hosts and there were folks on Fox News who did not treat these conspiracy theories as truth. There were people who pointed out that there was no evidence, and that didn't do Fox News a darn bit of good in this legal case. That was not sufficient. That, the argument that this was all opinion, the judge dismissed that, and the argument that this was the network had legitimately covered allegations that were newsworthy, and that they themselves had no way of verifying these allegations. Judge didn't believe that fit at all. And one guy whose name comes up more than anybody else in this lawsuit, in the judge's decision in summary judgment, was Lou Dobbs. I'm not going to say that Lou Dobbs single-handedly cost his former employer $787 million, but he made their job, the Dominion lawyer's job, a hell of a lot easier. Then the third thing, I kind of wonder if we're going to see cable news, the tone of it change from here. Because now the lesson is, if you are frothing at the mouth, if you are crazy and unpredictable and nobody knows what you're going to say next, you could end up being a major financial liability for your network.
Okay, let's pick up there. My commentary was focused on the fact before the settlement came out, before it happened, I taught con law yesterday, New York Times v. Sullivan, and I told my students, I love New York Times v. Sullivan. It's protected me for 33 years of a broadcast career against nuisance lawsuits. So I do not want a judgment that goes up on appeal that alters New York Times v. Sullivan. And I'm very glad they settled this. For broadcast news everywhere, I'm not as worried as you. We'll talk about it another time, but I wanted your hot takes. I'm going to go read Morning Jolt. I want to get to the war game. I think this is brilliant. I didn't know about it till this morning. Congressman Gallagher told me the entire committee is going to spend 2 hours. Now, they'll probably get 2 moves in. And if that, it's going to, and then they're going to condense it, explain it, and put it out. I think it's a great benefit to focus, as Samuel Johnson said, it focuses a man's mind wonderfully to know he's to be hanged in the morning. If the American people all watch the same red-blue, we're going to have the Democrats and the Republicans together doing this, we might actually learn something, Jim Garrity. What do you think?
So way back in the 2012 presidential election cycle, I argued we should get rid of debates. No offense to your fine work as a moderator in past presidential debates, Hugh. But I wanted every candidate to engage in a war game. Give each one of them a scenario of, there is a Syrian invasion of Lebanon, or China, decides to take Taiwan. Pick any world crisis, and you have the presidential candidate and their preferred advisors playing the role of the cabinet, and how do they handle it? Of course, they would never do this, but I'd just love to see how would people who want to be commander-in-chief respond when they get that message. We have Chinese, aircraft carrier deploying fighters and bombing Taiwan or something like that. I'd love to see what this happens. But I've heard, I assume you follow Elbridge Colby.
Very much. Bridge is a very important source.
Colby is now like one step away from being the guy at the beginning of the Invasion of the Body Snatchers movie, where they're here, they're coming, we're all, I don't mean he's panicking. I mean, like, he is just, like hair on fire, trying to grab people in the street and shake them and saying that the possibility of a war with China is very real, and we are really underprepared for this sort of thing. And we have very little ability to deter Chinese aggression. So I would love to see this. Now, one of the things he has observed is that when they do these sorts of things, certain moves that China could make are just not part of the game because nobody's really thought about it too much. Cyber attacks against the U.S. homeland to disable our response, knocking our satellites out of orbit. Obviously, global propaganda efforts that Taiwan is planning a terror attack. All of these things, it generally tends to, here's where our ships are, here's where the Chinese ships are, here's how far their missiles can strike and stuff like that. And all that stuff's valuable. It's just that when the real thing comes, we're going to see a lot of asymmetrical and non-traditional forms of warfare that I don't know if these war games will account. Maybe it gets too complicated. Maybe it gets to be too much to do in one.
Here's the advantage. I've just tweeted out. I hope Admiral Stavridis, Jerry Hendricks, Mark Montgomery, my three go-to navalists, plus Mike Pompeo, Robert O'Brien. I should have mentioned Bridge Colby. I hope everyone in the national security online community focuses on the game so that there's a common thread that people can respond to. Because the first question is going to be, does the American attack submarine force, stealthy and impossible to follow, sink Chinese ships? That's the number one question. And Biden has screwed it up. So we don't have strategic ambiguity. We have strategic bipolarity. I mean, which Joe Biden is there today? And Xi Jinping needs to know what we will do. And I think he needs to know we will sink their ships. What do you think?
So this is not the first time they've done something like this. Different groups, the military think tanks, military academies have run these sorts of things before. I have yet to hear one where the conclusion of the game is, hey, that worked out really well. We did hunky-dory. Taiwan was defended. It was a bad defeat for China, and everything was fine. You generally either hear, we won, but it was long and bloody and messy and a huge loss of life, huge loss of U.S. servicemen, et cetera. We eked out a win in a long struggle. Or you hear, no, we got our butts kicked, that we were completely unprepared and our countermeasures were not ready and stuff like that. So I'm not expecting this war game to give us good news. And I think it's
all I'm doing,
for us.
I just hope it focuses everybody on one scenario so we can all talk about the same thing. And actually, I just want to read what the smart people say about the same thing. Jim, I have been rereading Manchester's 3-volume Churchill. And the opening of Alone, the first chapter, is the quickest summary of the rise of the Nazis in Weimar Germany and what happened. I mean, it's really, in an hour, you can figure out an outline of what happened. And one of the things that I've become aware of, I never really studied what happened in Germany because of the Great Depression. And I never really knew, because I know what happened in America, but we never focused on what happened in Germany. Do you think we have any idea what's happened in China because of COVID? I think it's changed everything.
Yeah, we have the vaguest idea. I salute those who, considering the state of the Wall Street Journal reporter who's currently in a prison cell in Russia. I've had my disagreements with certain correspondents who are over in China and who follow China closely. I think there's always the potential you, quote unquote, go native and you start to see things from China's point of view rather than from an American or Western point of view. But that having been said, they are, putting their necks on the line, talking to Chinese people and trying to give those of us in the rest of the world a clear view of how things are in China. So before I get anything critical, I'm going to say thank you guys for doing your job, and I hope you never have a knock on your door in the middle of the night. With that said, no, and I don't know if Xi Jinping knows exactly how COVID has affected Chinese society and Chinese thinking that much. It has been, we know their casualty numbers are absolute nonsense. We know that the death rate was so much higher. We know that people went, bonkers, being locked up in their apartments for weeks at a time, having to take whatever food deliveries were available. I mean, like this was, a level and a scale of suppression and oppression that is kind of hard for us to get our heads around, because even in past authoritarian, brutal regimes, Nazi Germany, et cetera, you could still leave your house. Couldn't do that in China in this area. So
I just gave Garrity the indispensable, the rap sign, because you can no longer hear the music. You can no longer hear the music, right? That's when the hook comes out and grabs him. Excellent. Jim Garrity. Follow him at Jim Garrity on Twitter. Follow me to the next segment. I'll unpack this a lot more. Thank you, James. At 5:29 a.m. this morning, the New York Times published a story. It's an analytical story, and David Sanger is always worth reading. And I don't know William Broad and Chris Buckley very well, but Sanger is always worth reading. 3 nuclear superpowers rather than 2 usher in a new strategic era is the headline. Sub. China is on track to massively expand its nuclear arsenal, just as Russia suspends the last major arms control treaty. It augurs a new world in which Beijing, Moscow, and Washington will likely be atomic peers. Bad sub. Sanger didn't write that. We have long been in that world. Apparently, the New York Times is waking up to the necessity of focusing on it. It begins on the Chinese coast. Just 135 miles from Taiwan, Beijing is preparing to start a new reactor the Pentagon sees as delivering fuel for a vast expansion of China's nuclear arsenal. potentially making it an atomic peer of the United States and Russia. The reactor, known as a fast breeder, excels at making plutonium, the top fuel of atom bombs. The nuclear material for the reactor is being supplied by Russia, whose Rosatom nuclear giant has in the past few months completed the delivery of 25 tons of highly enriched uranium to get production started. That deal means that Russia and China are now cooperating on a project that will aid their own nuclear modernizations and, by the Pentagon's estimates, produce arsenals whose combined size could dwarf that of the United States. This new reality is prompting a broad rethinking of American nuclear strategy that few anticipated a dozen years ago, when President Barack Obama envisioned a world that was inexorably moving towards eliminating all nuclear weapons. Instead, the United States is now facing questions about how to manage a three-way nuclear rivalry, which upends much of the deterrence strategy that has successfully avoided nuclear war. China's expansion at a moment when Russia is deploying new types of arms and threatening to use battlefield nuclear weapons against Ukraine is just the latest example of what American strategists see as a new, far more complex era compared to what the United States lived through during the Cold War. All right, that's not correct. The Cold War was as complex as it gets, because until Nixon went to China in 1972, China did have a nuclear deterrent. It wasn't very advanced, but it was there, and it was a tripart deal. And it leaves out, at least in the lead graphs, Great Britain is a nuclear power, Israel is a nuclear power, and France is a nuclear power. There are lots of people with nuclear arsenals, and Pakistan is a nuclear power, and India is a nuclear power. And for many years after Mr. Khan stole the secrets and gave them to India, I think that's how it worked. Maybe he gave them to Pakistan. I can't recall. I gave them to Pakistan. And then India unveiled its nuclear arsenal as well. We have lived in a multipolar world of nuclear threat. We just haven't thought about it much. Now, tonight, the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party, which Kevin McCarthy stood up and which Democrats voted for, which is chaired by Mike Gallagher and his co-chairman is from Illinois, and they're all going to play a war game tonight. And they're going to film it, condense it, and put it out. I think this is a great thing because you have heard, or perhaps you have not heard because you are a Steelers fan, we play war games all the time. Different people play it at different places. I have played it once, and I was assigned the role of the vice president, which is a great role to have because you got nothing to do with anything. Really, they don't even tell you stuff. They just ask you not to say anything. So they gave me, you draw it out of the hat. You're the vice president. You might as well leave. Nevertheless, it was pretty interesting. AEI ran it at their Sea Pines Island retreat, and it was a grand thing, and it was interesting. But I've never watched one that involves, I have never watched one that involves an attack on Taiwan. And that's going to be, and the first question for the president is going to be, do we sink those ships? That's the first question. And I will be interested to see what happens tonight. I really, really want you to watch that. And if you have a comment on it, 1-800-520-1234. What I really appreciate about this, and what I hope the American press does, is focus on the game so that everyone is talking about the same thing. There are lots of scenarios out there. Elbridge Colby tweets about it all the time. O'Brien does. Pompeo does. There are a lot of China. Josh Rogan brings us great understanding. Chaos Under Heaven is a great book to read. The 100-Year Marathon by Michael Pillsbury. The very best book is Dr. Kissinger's On China. But we have no idea what Xi Jinping is thinking or what he thinks we're going to do. This will add some clarity as to what might happen. And since you've got some young and smart House of Representatives participants, it's a good committee. You're going to see what some young and smart people think will happen and what they would do. And then we're going to be able to talk about that with people like Admiral Stavridis, Admiral Montgomery, Captain Hendricks, and other navalists, and then strategists of the Andrew Marshall School like Jerry Hendricks and Robert O'Brien and maybe Matt Pottinger will weigh in and Mike Pompeo, and you can get Bridge Colby and a bunch of other Sino-American specialists to talk about this. But it's here. It's already here. We have to understand it's here. And maybe you'll get Admiral McRaven and General Mattis and General McChrystal to comment as well. People who have been there and done war, not talk show hosts. All right. It's great for us to observe and report and tell you what happened. I have no opinions other than we are currently in a morass of ambiguity. It's not strategic ambiguity. It is incompetent ambiguity. We don't know what we think because we haven't thought through what we would do and communicated it strategically. And the messages coming out of the Pentagon are mixed up with the messages coming out of state, which are mixed up with the messages coming out of the national security establishment, which are completely mangled by President Biden's statements and retractions by his staff. It's a mess. Xi Jinping can be forgiven for looking over here and not knowing what we're going to do. I would also like to know what McConnell thinks. Leader McConnell returned yesterday, and he gave, there's one clip I just want you to listen to.